Good afternoon and welcome to the WEIM Governing Body General Session meeting. Please note that all audience audio connections will be muted until the comment portion of the call. With that, I'll turn the call over to Chair Anita Decker. Please go ahead.
Thank you. So I want to welcome all our virtual participants this afternoon. This is kind of a watershed meeting in that we're going to hear a bit about the Bonneville Power Administration and Tucson Electric Power go-lives in the Western Energy Imbalance Market. And that brings us to 79% of the Western interconnect load, which is quite an accomplishment, in addition to just passing our $2 billion in benefits mark in 7 short years. So those are pretty big milestones. Second, recall that prior to the various COVID protocols, the governing body used to meet kind of in different places to do stakeholder outreach. While phone calls and virtual meetings have been adequate, they're not really sufficient, and we, members of the governing body, were recently in Arizona visiting some of our stakeholders, and it really did highlight the adequacy of calls, but not sufficiency of calls. So really appreciated the folks down there meeting with us. I want to acknowledge that the Regional Issues Forum has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes to reposition itself with several new liaisons, and they've been actively working on how they're going to prioritize and bring issues before the governing body, consistent with their new charges outlined in the Governance Review Committee's last edition, which was approved in August of 2021. They've moved beyond education, and they are a body to provide input in issues to the governing body. So we're looking forward to that as they continue working. They just met their first in-person meeting at the CREPC meeting last week. Lastly, I hope that you will join us tomorrow for the joint session of the Cal ISO Board of Governors and the Western Energy Imbalance Market governing body. Some updates that would otherwise be in our general session are in the joint session, as they may be joint or will be joint authority issues. So with that, let's go ahead and turn it over to the Cal ISO Corporate Secretary, Roger Collington, for the roll call.
Great. Thank you, Chair Decker. We'll start with you. Chair Decker?
Here.
Vice Chair Konzioka?
Here.
Member Fong?
Here.
Member Gardner?
Here.
Member Prescott?
Here.
Excellent. Thank you, governing body members. We have a quorum, all present, and back to you, Chair Decker.
All right, thank you, Roger. With that, the next item on our agenda is to hear from the Cal ISO Chief Executive Officer, which is Elliot Mainzer. And so, Elliot, if you could tell us what's going on.
Sorry to interrupt. We actually have the public comment. Agenda item number 1.
Roger, thank you. I turned my page too quickly. Thank you. So before we get into the body of our meeting, or as we start our meeting, is there anybody that has a comment on any items not on our agenda today? So if the public has, or stakeholders have any comments or any questions on anything not on the agenda today, please raise your hand.
So please feel free to place yourself into the comment queue by utilizing the raise hand feature located at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a mobile device, you can tap the screen to display the toolbar, then press raise hand. You'll be unmuted when it is your turn. Please accept the unmute message to become unmuted. If you're on a phone, you can press #2 to enter the queue. Please then state your name and affiliation once unmuted. And it looks as though we have no comments at this time.
Okay.
All right.
Okay, now we will turn it over to Elliot.
Not quite yet.
Oh, okay.
All right. But wait, there's more. We have agenda item number 2, which is the general session minutes. And since I'm talking, why don't I just go ahead and do that? So we have the decision on the March 15, 2022 general session minutes, and I would need a motion from the governing body.
This is Prescott. So moved.
Thank you, Member Prescott. And second by Rob. And let me go ahead and take the vote. Chair Decker, your vote, please.
Aye.
Vice Chair Konzioka, your vote.
Aye.
Member Fong.
Yes.
Member Gardner.
Aye.
And Member Prescott.
Aye.
Thank you, governing body members. And now we're up for the long-awaited CEO report.
Long-awaited.
I want to get into the body of this because there's some real good news in it. So, Elliot, please.
Thank you, Chair Decker and members of the governing body. It's great to see all of you. And indeed, it has been a extremely consequential and I think very positive last couple of months for the Western EIM community. Really exciting stuff. Of course, back when we had our last public session in the middle of March, we just announced that Tacoma Power and Avista Utilities had joined the Wbein. And then on April 21st, we were so pleased to announce that having reached the milestone of $2 billion in cumulative benefits for the Wbein since 2014. That's just an incredible just incredible amount of value created on both the economic and environmental side for participants across the West. And I think just another really solid piece of evidence of the value of West-wide market coordination. And just thanks to all of our market participants for making that a possibility. And then, of course, just last week on the 3rd of May, we had extremely successful cutovers by both Renewable Power Administration and Tucson Electric into the Wbein. And it's just such an honor for all of us and me personally to be able to welcome BPA and Tucson to the Wbein community. It is, not only do both of those utilities bring such tremendous value. I mean, the FCRPS, such a vital source of clean energy in the Pacific Northwest, an incredible piece of resource diversity and transmission capability. Tucson, another really, really solid utility and very valued partner in the Desert Southwest. But it's just, the amount of work that goes into these implementations is staggering. And of course, I can't resist having spent, a big portion of my career at BPA. Just hats off to all the people that made that possible. That is an enormous implementation lift to pull all those pieces together. And the same for Tucson. I know every one of these is unique and different. And the fact that both went so well is just a fabulous outcome. And we're just couldn't be happier to welcome them to the EIM community. And as Chair Decker said, that, we're now here coming up on 80% of the load in the West represented by the Wbein, and just really excited to keep moving and building value there. Of course, at the same time that we continue to be onboarding EIM participants, we're working really hard on our EDAM initiative. And back on the 28th of April, we, right on time, were able to release the straw proposal for the extended day-ahead market. And again, when you're in these positions, all you can do is just be grateful for the number of people, the amount of work, the amount of input, the amount of collaboration that goes into something like that, not only inside the ISO, but, a lot of entities across the West have really leaned in to help us get to this point. And I think that we tried to make sure that the straw proposal really reflected that collective input of all of the different stakeholders from many different sectors into the straw proposal, and also try to consolidate gains and try to frame things as accurately and as clearly as we possibly could, and identify those areas where we still have work to do. So I think everybody was taking just a little bit of a breath here the last couple of weeks, but now gearing up for our public meetings on the 25th and 26th of May. And then comments on the straw proposal are going to be due on June 16th. Also, I know that, of course, in the same time that the market design is moving very actively, the governance conversation, we'll hear a little more about that today, is continuing to progress. And even at the May 25th and 26th meeting, excuse me, we'll also have plenty of room for update on the governance work as well. So just really, really pleased to have the EDAM straw proposal on the street. And thanks again to everybody for getting us to that critical first milestone and for the work that will come here across the balance of the spring and the summer. I wanted just to also note, as I did in my CEO report, there are, of course, other initiatives that are at play at the ISO that factor into our overall market design and that ultimately will be harmonized and integrated in with the broader day-ahead market. I'm not going to get into significant detail on those, but of course we have the day-ahead market enhancements, the imbalance reserve product. The proposal for that was put on the street a couple of weeks ago. There is ongoing work on the resource sufficiency evaluation, obviously such a fundamental piece of the underlying currency of trust in the market. The Wheel Through initiative is continuing to progress. You'll hear updates later today from Anna McKenna on both of those, exactly where those initiatives stand. And of course, our price formation enhancement initiative is also just about ready to kick off. As a matter of fact, we should be announcing the working groups for that initiative here very shortly. And I just wanted to, we are thinking on a very integrated basis about how all these pieces need to fit together to a very rational and well-designed marketplace that works for all participants. So a lot of work there. I'll also just mention at the end of this month, we'll be getting together as the officer team to make sure we're thinking about the sequencing, the timing, and the staffing needs for each of those major initiatives, just to make sure that we can keep them moving at the appropriate pace and done at a very high level of quality. I wanted to mention as well, at the same time that the EIM has been evolving and that we've had the EDAM straw proposal, we've been thinking a lot here at the ISO over the last year about where the overarching organization is heading over the next several years. And we've now completed a refresh of the ISO's strategic plan. So it's been the first time in several years that we've done this. We got a lot of really fabulous input from our Board of Governors, from the EIM governing body. We reached out to EIM entities, market participants, the utilities inside and outside of California, other sectors, got a lot of really good input. And tomorrow we'll be taking that strategic plan to our Board of Governors for formal approval. And we will also be, later this week, we're taking the Board of Governors for formal approval. And this is really going to become the central organizing principle for the prioritization of activities at the ISO, for the deployment of our human and financial capital. And I think folks should see that it also, I think, does a really nice job of balancing our responsibilities today with where we want to be headed in the future. You're going to really see, I think there's really good information in the plan about market evolution and governance evolution and our continued partnerships across the Western United States. So I'm really excited to get that document on the street here shortly and to start really implementing on it. Just one last thing I wanted to mention for today is that we, like many other organizations, are continuing to try to figure out what our world will look like as the pandemic at least starts to taper off. I know it's hard to say that we're completely out of the woods with respect to COVID, but we have been thinking deeply about our sort of approach to workplace flexibility. And, the last few months, we've done a lot of thinking about this topic, and we are moving into a sort of a much more flexible approach to our workplace for our employees. Staff have been working, the majority of our staff have been working remotely for the last couple of years. Of course, our control center operators and other critical infrastructure staff have been on site, and we continue to really appreciate their sacrifices. But we've been able to operate the organization, I think, quite successfully from primarily a remote posture. And our employees have really spoken to us that many of them would like to continue to have a significant amount of flexibility in how they approach work. We also know from folks in the workforce who are looking to work at the ISO that having the option for remote work is something that's very important as part of taking a job at the ISO. So we are in the final stages of finalizing a new policy around workplace flexibility, where we will be working with each of our employees and giving them choices about the extent to which they'd like to spend time in the building or working remotely, and then customizing their experience to maximize their productivity and to ensure that the ISO is able to continue meeting its really, really important strategic goals. So this is going to be a big change for us. I know many of us in organizations across the country are trying to figure this out, but we live in a new world. It's a different labor market, and we're going to have to adapt like other organizations. So that concludes my update for today. I really appreciate the support of the governing body and all the work that you're doing on behalf of the organization, and I'm happy to take any questions or comments if you have them.
So any questions by any of the governing body members?
I think Rob may have one.
And Rob, you're on mute.
Elliot, great report. That's a lot of positive news, a lot to think about, and I'm really pleased to hear how positively things are moving forward. I have one clarification question on price formation enhancement initiative.
Yeah.
And the question is, will the scarcity pricing and pricing of fast start resources move in parallel with EDAM, or do you anticipate that this might move forward at a different pace?
I think it's largely in parallel at this point. I know that's one of the issues that is going to be considered in that initiative. We've got it parked in that space for right now, but obviously as we're developing that design, and there are other elements of the day-ahead market that sort of implicate price formation, there's interactivity. So we're going to try to be really crosswalking people between those two initiatives as we do them sort of in parallel or at least simultaneously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other questions for Elliot? Elliot, your written report was full of things associated with the Western Energy Imbalance Market, so great written report, great report. With that, we're going to move on to the chair of the Public Service Commission and the body of state regulators. Chair, Commissioner Thabavar, will provide a report from the body of the state regulators. And I do want to say, if folks missed the CREPC-Bosser meeting last week, it was really well done, and there's just a lot of information, and the commissioners across the region were very active in their comments and questions and the different sessions. So, Chair LeVar.
Thank you. I appreciate the chance to give this report to the governing body from the body of state regulators. And I want to congratulate the ISO on both recent news events, the two new Go Live editions with Tucson and Bonneville Power, and also the $2 billion benefits threshold. Those are both significant thresholds, and I congratulate those. As Chair Decker said, we held a Bosser meeting in person in San Diego on Monday, May 2nd, and that was in conjunction with 3 days worth of meetings with CREPC-YRAB. And I agree, these meetings were excellent. The Bosser meeting covered a lot of issues, and I'll give you the high points of what we covered and what our plans are going forward. And then discussions were able to continue among Bosser members and others over the next 3 days. First, I just want to let you know that Weim has hired a new program manager, Bonnie Lamond, who is now working alongside Worry Lee, who's a wholesale market analyst for Weim, and both will now be providing assistance to the body of state regulators, particularly in the short term, helping to analyze the extended day-ahead market initiative. And that was the main topic of our meeting last week. Yeah, it was just last week. It feels like it was longer. That was what we spent most of our time on. Mark Rothelder, who's the senior vice president and chief operating officer with the ISO, provided a very good update on the high points of that initiative and presented the significant areas that it covers for the voluntary extended day-ahead market straw proposal. And then we dug into one granular issue a little deeper as Phil Pettengill, who's Director of Regional Integration at the ISO, and Doug Howe on behalf of the PSC MOU Group, gave a deeper update on greenhouse gas accounting and the various mechanisms that could be implemented into market reforms, and particularly with the day-ahead market. This is an issue that several Bosser members have expressed specific interest in context of the day-ahead straw proposal. So we dug deeper into that and had a good discussion about those issues. The body of state regulators is planning to compile comments on the straw proposal. We're hoping to finalize them between now and our next meeting. We meet on June 10th, and that's shortly before the filing deadline of June 16th. We haven't had a draft circulating yet, so I can't comment specifically on what we're doing, but we do intend to provide some feedback on that straw proposal, and there's a lot of interest from the members of the Bosser about what it contains and how it will roll out and how things will work. There's also a meeting, as you all know, on the 25th and 26th of May at the ISO's headquarters in Folsom to discuss this proposal. This will have more detailed discussion on the design elements. The two individuals from Weim, Bonnie Lamond and Worry Lee, will be participating on that as they're both assisting us to prepare our comments. And my understanding is several Bosser members are also planning to attend. My day job has a 2-day hearing that's preventing my participation, but I look forward to reviewing what comes out of that meeting and reviewing our opportunity to provide formal comments on this proposal. This has been a long time in the making, and we're excited to be part of the development of this process. In addition to looking at the day-ahead market, we also had a report at our Bosser meeting from Commissioner Lee Fatani, who provided an update on the Governance Review Committee's work. She presented some options for what the committee is looking at, particularly in context of the day-ahead straw proposal and what implications that may have for governance. And we had a good discussion among the members of the body of state regulators, and we will continue to engage in that issue. And we appreciate the work that Commissioner Taney is doing on behalf of the body of state regulators to keep engaged with the Governance Review Committee. We are also coordinating with the ISO and with Weim to provide an in-person electricity market training and simulation in Salt Lake City on June 1st and 2nd. Past training sessions have been very well received, and this one seems to have a significant amount of interest, so we're looking forward to a really useful and productive training session the first week of May. And we are also engaging actively in the current nominating committee process, and we have provided our input to the nominating committee along with the input of all other sectors. We are represented on that nominating committee by boss or vice chair Haley Williamson from the Nevada Public Utilities Commission, and I just want to express my appreciation to her for all the work she does to provide our input to that process. And that completes my report on our current activities. I would be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Commissioner. Any questions by the governing body members? Commissioner, that was a great report and a great summary of a number of the elements of the BOSSR and the CREPC meeting. And again, it was well attended. It was well put together. I think the working relationship you have with Mari is just fantastic, and it's, I think, benefiting everyone. So thank you for your report this afternoon, and no questions from the governing body member. We will move on to our next agenda item.
Thank you.
So next on our agenda is the Regional Issues Forum update, and the chair of the Regional Issues Forum is Vijay Sadal from Western Resource Advocates, and he will provide an update of their first in-person meeting and what else is going on with them. Vijay?
Thank you. Thank you, Chair Decker, and hello all the governing body members. Can you guys hear me? Great, thank you. I'm definitely not Josh Walter, though he's a pretty cool, fun person to have gotten to know. And originally we were thinking Josh would give the update, but if Josh is on, he can add to my update. As Chair Decker said it very well, this was our first in-person RIF meeting, but technically it was our second RIF meeting, which was public. The first one was in mid-January, and it was very good to see everybody post-COVID in San Diego. As chair and vice chair, Josh and I hosted this meeting, and 80% of the sector liaisons were able to be there in person. The agenda was kind of, frankly, pretty straightforward. We just kept it to 3 or 4 items in the interest of the 2.5-hour time frame. But a big thank you goes to, at the outset, to Holly Taylor and Emily Hughes, who helped coordinate the logistics at the heels of the YRAB CREPC meeting so we could have the space. So a big thank you to CalISO staff, first of all. We had some very interesting conversations, and I'd like to just give an FYI that we realized that the meeting should start with a bit of a FYI on the origins and scope and the role of RIF. And therefore, Matt LeCar from PG&E did a pretty good stage setting on what RIF is about, why it's been what it is, and the kind of issues we typically take on. And that trend setting, level setting update was critical for us to be able to bring the segue into Therese Hampton, who spoke on behalf of the EI and GRC on what the Joint Authority Framework is all about. Therese then presented on the GRC deliberations, as you're all very much aware, from the Joint Authority Framework that was approved last year. And in some very helpful ways laid out different ideas and questions on how the RIF could either grow or evolve with different stakeholder models of inclusivity and engagement that currently exist out in the market structures around the U.S. One of the strategic intentions of ours to leverage Theresa's time and ideas that she was bringing to us was that Margaret McCall really helped us set up a panel follow-up discussion to Theresa's presentation, where 4 risk sector liaisons, Vistra Energy, Seattle Satellite, BPA, and myself, representing public interest consumer advocates, responded to a panel discussion to Theresa's presentation on behalf of the GRC. I will say that the panel discussion was very lively, and we landed on a bunch of different ideas, what kind of role we can have. Will it be formal or informal but enhanced? We all had some consensus thankfully, on the value of RIF should not be ignored, but how can we give some informal comments if our sectors do not agree, or can we have minority and majority comments if the full RIF wants to comment? So overall, there was a good agreement that we need to go back and caucus with our respective sectors and see if other voices are also not being heard, which supposedly was also an element of observation brought to the table. Therese did a very valuable job in presenting that there's, and I think Chair Decker would remember from the Boston conversation, it's not that the RIF is in trouble or something is wrong, but what can you do better and how can RIF be more proactive? To that end, one last item I would like to bring up on that panel discussion was there was a clear consensus amongst the RIF sector liaisons that if critical initiatives are coming to vote in the near future, being aware of the checkpoints would be helpful so RIF can get ahead of itself and get out of the inertia and engage quickly and respond either as sectoral comments only or collectively on behalf of the full RIF. Second last item was CalISO VP Ann McKenna. Ann came and presented on the CalISO policy catalog, how it typically works, the different initiatives underway. There were a couple of slides that were phenomenally very informative that I had never seen before. It was good learning experience and also some improvements some future improvements that CalISO was considering proposing for future. So it was a very healthy conversation in which Anne clearly wanted to express an interest for ideas, and we were informed of flexibility in the future improvements. Lastly, which I think is, I know, of much interest to some of the governing body members, the RIF sector liaisons have identified about 8 to 12 priorities that they would like to tackle, and we all agree that we can't take all of them on. So I, as the chair of RIF, have proposed a couple of value proposition questions, and we are meeting on May 26th, right after the EDAM meeting in Folsom, and try to, in our coordination meeting, lock down 4 or 5 priority topics that we will take on and evaluate in terms of discussion or assessment to be done and where we need perspective or analysis from CalISO staff. So that is my update. It was a very good meeting, and I appreciate everybody who could be there.
All right. Questions for Vijay from any of the governing body members?
Nita, this is Rob.
Go ahead, Rob. I couldn't quite see your hand up there.
Oh. Vijay, good afternoon. And not so much a question, but as a comment. And I thought that you and Josh have put together a very substantive agenda and a challenging one as the RIF looks at implementing its new authority as recommended by the GRC. And I recognize that there were some, challenging perspectives because not everyone thinks the same, and moving it forward to where you can act as a body to provide input and more direction is welcome. And, I just want to say best wishes to you and everybody else in the RIF in making this work and making their time more effective and providing input and providing recommendations and guidance. So thank you, and to everybody else who participated on those panels.
Thank you. I appreciate the observation and the healthy reminder that we have a big task ahead, but thank you. Thank you.
Any other comments from the governing body?
Anita, this is Jennifer, and I have a quick question for Vijay.
Yeah, please.
Sorry, Anita, I didn't hear you. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Okay, great. Yeah, Vijay, thanks so much for the update. It sounds like the RIF has been very busy, which is great to hear. My question is just really on next steps following the panel discussion that you had at the prep team meeting, and just where you see this conversation is going. It sounds like you had a really robust discussion following Teresa's update and her presentation on various, stakeholder engagement models that the RIF could potentially consider. And so I'm just curious, it sounds like the sectors are now going back to caucus and have additional discussions. where do you see this going? Is the RIF going to come back together at a future date and actually vote on a potential model going forward, or do you think there's going to be sort of a longer-term process where you're going to make smaller changes over time?
That's actually a very good question, and I'm going to slice that question into a very diplomatic answer by saying it's a bit of both. I don't know if there was an agreement in the RIF sector liaisons, my colleagues, that we want to do a formal voting on, I'm literally quoting slide 17 from Theresa's presentation that had the different stakeholder models, which we would want to land on. So I'm not sure some of my colleagues would be sure that their sectors would be ready to vote on something specific. But there is a desire to actually really implement operational guidelines number 4 through 7, which really talks about doing deep dives on issues. And I think we might want to leverage existing charter authority and take on some openings that this new authority framework is giving us. I will admit, and this is my personal opinion only, that I felt that the GRC thoughts coming to RIF seem to have a lot on the plate and a lot of different ways that RIF could engage. And I think we want to pull back and see which is the most realistic way we can engage now, so we help with the current initiatives that don't lose RIF input. But where we want to make some strategic, bolder improvements is where then we develop a little bit of an action plan and a value proposition, and then the sectors can weigh in on that more clearly. That's kind of how I'm thinking. But I think we're trying to think of the priority issues that we want to agree in May as a way to leverage this joint authority framework to see how can we marry these two and yet not ignore what is up in front right now in terms of regional initiatives. I don't know if I answered your question, but that was...
I appreciate that. It sounds like there may be some smaller changes that can be made in the near term, but in terms of actually, sort of uprooting the engagement model that the RIF currently benefits from, that might be a longer term issue that you guys will address. So, very helpful. Thanks, Vijay.
Yeah, quick follow-up on that. I think there's a general desire for RIF to be heard more. How and where we need to be super formal with formal influence versus where informally be very active. I think that's where we are.
Other questions for Vijay? I have to say, Vijay, you have a heavy lift with lots of new liaisons, lots of issues in front of you. I am really encouraged by knowing that you guys are working on it. You're going to come back to us, and I'm really anxious to see this process start to work. And I think probably the first couple times that things kind of come forward, it might be a little bit clunky, but I think you guys are going to get this into a well-oiled machine, and I really look forward to that.
Thank you for your comments and your support.
Okay. So we'll move on to the next agenda item, which was on the agenda. It says the Western Energy Imbalance Market Planning. We didn't have anything for that agenda item today, so we are going to move to item number 7, which is the Western Energy Imbalance Market Implementation Update. So Khaled Abdul Rahman, the Cal ISO VP of Power Systems and Market Technology, is going to lead this off. And I believe that we may also have a representative from Bonneville and from Tucson Electric Power who will make comments. But Khaled, lead us off.
Yes. Thank you, Chair Decker. Good afternoon, Chair Decker, and the governing body members. Well, I'm happy. I mean, the good news has already reached probably everybody, but I'll try to go maybe, quickly on some of the things that distinguish this go live from probably previous go lives. So next slide, please. As you know, this is just another confirmation of, the line is moving up, where we, on the left, where we show we are here. So this is now both Bonneville and Tucson has been integrated fully into the WEIM market. And what is left for us is about 2% of the Western interconnection load. that we are looking for the implementation and integration into the WEIM by next year, spring of 2023. So right now we are at 77%. The other 2% that is committed for WEIM will be spring of, in particular, April 3rd of next year. Next slide. Since I did not last time, I promised that we will look into ways of putting some capacity or maybe, sizing for those. We are still looking into that. We have not, forget that, but it is kind of a little bit challenging, and we have a couple of ideas that we are floating around of how to do it. But nevertheless, I wanted just to show maybe this slide one more time about after BPA and Tucson has integrated, and probably you will realize compared to the last time, the amount of integration that PPA brought to the different balancing areas in the Northwest or across the Western interconnection. It is a very critical, strategically placed, among almost like 13 adjacent EIM entities, which, made it very interesting to work out all of these energy transfer modeling and components. Next slide. So,
Glenn, before you go to the next slide, can you go back to that one for just a minute?
Sure.
Do you have this slide with BPA not in it?
Yes. Last time, actually, when I showed it without connections for PPA, but we can provide you with both. We have it actually for every year from the 2014 for every edition of EIM, how it looked like, and we can send you that file probably with all of those versions.
I'd like to see that, so thank you.
Yeah, no problem. Okay, so the next slide, as promised, because you all know now, that, after the, 2 months ago, we had Avista and Tacoma, and on May 3rd, we also integrated Bonneville and Tucson. Just to give you a little bit of a feel of why we feel like this is such a big accomplishment, because to integrate PPA, we had to do a lot of new automation for a lot of data that otherwise would be manually operator input, through a screen. That setup is not practical for the way that Bonneville wanted to participate in the market. So the project included a lot of development of new interfaces that allow system-to-system communication and made the participation of Bonneville in the WEIM to be feasible and practical, and at the same time, allow the operator to focus on operating the system rather than just continuously inputting data. That was a big ticket for Bonneville, and we accomplished that. There was a new resource modeling for Bonneville. We call it the overlapping resource aggregation. The fact that we have all of the hydro system that Bonneville is managing, there was a very special modeling for all of those resources and aggregating them in different aggregations, but with the same physical resources. We have done something similar, close to this for PowerX, but with Bonneville, we advanced that model quite a bit to be able to satisfy and enable the participation in a more efficient manner. And as I mentioned before, also that Bonneville has 13 adjacent EIM entities that are currently in the WEIM, so that was also a big challenge. And then we have, along with this project, PPA had a lot of upgrades and replacement for some of their technology systems, like billing and settlements, like the outage management system. And many of those, complicated, those were running in parallel So at the end of the project, all of these got together and they met at a certain point where we were able to demonstrate, for parallel operation as well as for the go live, how smooth the tasks were due to this extreme and very well prepared readiness. The same thing for Tucson. I personally believe the Tucson implementation is also very unique in the sense that Tucson is a WEIM customer, but not an RC West customer. So that brought an interesting, how we can have the network model, ready at the time without impacting the production, and at the same time, how we reconcile the RC functionality with the EIM and the RC functionality that is provided by another RC provider. The main, probably the highlight of the Tucson implementation is the joint owned unit, JOU, they call it, which is like, the same physical unit is shared by multiple owners. The challenge here is that the multiple owners are not in the same balancing area. So we had this pilot project for Tucson to kind of define how we can do this joint owned unit modeling in a very special way that is the first time is done in the industry, which we allow everybody to bid in the market economically for their own share. But at the same time, when we are doing the optimization, we consider the physical characteristics of the physical unit as one. So we don't divide ramping. We don't, we consider the physical resource with all of its physical characteristics, like ramping, like limits, like startup and shutdown. And that was a very, very innovative way of doing it. And Tucson was very helpful and, kind of a true partner for us to reach to a solution that we can implement on time for this. So I take this opportunity to thank Tucson for that. The last thing is, Tucson, even, maybe it's the amount of volume of the load may be small, but it is actually challenging because of the behind the meter solar is impacting the accuracy of the load forecast at certain times. So we worked with Tucson. Our forecasting team has done quite a bit of fantastic job in trying to come up with 3 models actually for that. And we look at the different time of the day where we think which model is giving us the most or the more accurate results. And we are continuing, and we are committed to continue to fine tune these models. But this is also another, again, very, very new to the industry. Everybody is trying to find solution for the behind the meter, and now we are actually facing it and feeling it very heavily for the accuracy of the Tucson. So those are the highlights of this implementation, which made it really very interesting. 2 projects very interesting, and the implementation team is looking, was very happy to get to the finish line on this. Next year, as I mentioned earlier in my presentation, we have 3 entities, including Avangrid, which is a generation-only balancing area. That they are all 3 are on track for the implementation in the spring. While we're doing this integration of the WEIM, our eyes and our market design, technology design experts are actually participating in the EDAM, and we are very closely monitoring and started thinking actually of certain, methods of how we can implement whatever is going to unfold in that initiative. So very integrated in that initiative, our eyes on that one as well. Thank you. That's the end of my presentation.
Okay. So Claude, I hope you'll hang on. So I see John's got a question or a comment.
Yes,
sure.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Anita. Khaled, thanks for this report. I always appreciate it. And congratulations on the onboarding process with 2 very complicated entities coming on board. And the reports I'm hearing is that they went generally flawlessly. So congratulations to you and your staff and also the utilities. The got to this point. My question is on your slide 2, which talks about the percent of the Western Interconnect load. If you look at that slide, it shows a percentage, but it doesn't on that slide indicate what percentage you're talking about. Now,
Yep.
Is that a non-coincidental peak of each of those entities? I'm just curious where that number comes from.
So this number is the WECC peak load that is published, which includes actually the western, of the United States, and includes Mexico Sinase, and it includes BC Hydro in Canada and Alberta, Canada. So that's the formal number that WECC is using, and we are measuring against that. If you want to know, there's Alberta itself is about 10% of that number. So whatever is left, 10% for Alberta, about I think 2% maybe Sinase, and then 1%. There are 3 PUDs in the Northwest. So there is about 13% made of those. And then there is about 7% is committed to SPP. So if you want the total numbers, a breakdown of all of them like that.
Okay, thank you.
And Rob, I see you have a question.
Yes, thank you, Anita. Colette, I too thank you for the presentation. And like John, I heard or received lots of good news feedback on the rollout and implementation and the smoothness and the quality. And so you and your staff should be commended for making this go well. I have a question regarding your comments on the joint-owned units. And my question is, the work done for TEP, is that considered a pilot? Is you need to monitor that for a time? Will that go or be disseminated and offered more widely at some point? And can you provide any comments along those lines?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, there was a discussion with the stakeholders at a certain point where we will develop this pilot for, officially it's a pilot project for Tucson to define and to get a lot of information of how it works, and then that will feed into a policy initiative that we will start for the joint-owned units. But based on the Tucson experience, that will be valuable information to give to our policy folks to formulate a final proposal. And at that point, we offer it to the rest of the market as well. We're calling it a pilot, but the amount of work that we have done there is amazing. There is still some challenges that we left it for the policy initiative, like how to deal with different types of resources. With Tucson, we modeled it as a simple, aggregation or a joint owned, or the shares are the physical resource. We consider it like more of a simple resource, traditional, conventional resource. Now, if you want to expand that idea, like what if the resources are different types, like what if it is an MSG resource? What if it is like aggregation of storage resource? So that we left it for the policy initiative. But whatever we learned by the implementation will feed into the policy as information to help them convert.
That's excellent news. There's a lot of joint-owned units that certainly may be interested in doing this once you have that policy development done, and I'm certainly look forward to seeing that happen. So thank you.
Absolutely.
Other questions by the governing body? So, Claude, I think we're going to see if Bonneville and Tucson have someone to speak, and then we may come back to you for a minute. So I believe, do we have Todd Kolster and Mark Simons from Bonneville on? Operator?
Yeah, we're probably working through some unmuting issues. Can you hear me? This is Todd Koheiser.
Yes, I see. We see you. We see your hand up, Todd. So great.
Oh, okay. And Mark, can you get on as well?
I think you can see me and hear me now. Is that correct?
Yeah.
We can hear you. Okay. Well, no view. That's interesting. Anyway, I thought I had set it up for video, but first and foremost, unless is there someone from Tucson that needs to do a sound check?
Maybe later.
All right. Anyway, thank you very much, members of the governing body, Chair Decker. Appreciate the time this afternoon. And first and foremost, Khaled, thank you to you and your staff. As you communicated, our connection to the market was indeed very smooth and really is a testament to the countless hours put in by BPA staff and our partners, including the ISO, to deliver and test our grid modernization projects that really have enabled our participation in EIM. So I think that's really great. Want to echo that and emphasize that is a good and appropriate view from the ISO and the perspective of the governing body. Also wanted to add a different perspective, which is that we also recognize that we haven't met all of our customers' expectations prior to EIM go live, and we'll be working to ensure that we improve upon those commitments in the coming days and weeks. For example, we'll be announcing the timing of our EIM settlements workshop here in the coming days and expect to do that here in mid-May. Overall, Bonneville's participation and operations in EIM have been stable. We're also very pleased to see that transmission customer donations have been steadily increasing in our time in the EIM. And really, we've had an opportunity to see our balancing authority both be a net seller and a net buyer in the EIM thus far. So really pleased in terms of what we've been able to achieve thus far. And thank you to the ISO and all of our partners, vendors, and customers who have helped make this happen. Really appreciate it. Thank you.
And Todd, do you want to add something to Mark's comments?
Well, I guess I would add on just a little bit to what Hal had said regarding some of the uniqueness of the Bonneville model and some of the enhancements that the California ISO made to kind of make our participation possible. There were a lot of enhancements as far as, new APIs that allowed us to automate things that, quite honestly, I don't think we'd be able to perform manually. So those automations, those new APIs were really critical, and California ISO, we just really appreciate the support they provided in that regard. And again, the enhancements they also made to the overlapping resource aggregation model that was really critical to enable our support and kind of the complex, hydro operations we have up here in the Northwest. So it's a great team down there. I think our implementation wouldn't have been possible without that, rich collaboration.
Thank you. No, so it's so early yet. You guys are just barely on. Our next meeting will be June 29th, and I'm hoping that one or both of you can come back on June 29th and maybe give us a little more flavor of, so what are you seeing? How is the value working out? And hopefully things continue to go smooth. It's really, I think, edifying for all of us to hear that there were some new processes put in place that will assist others, that were to the benefit of the system and to Bonneville coming on board. And that's just a huge credit, I think, to all the parties working on this, both Bonneville and the ISO staff, and just a lot of creativity and interest in making something happen instead of making something stop. So really great kudos to all of you, and BPA particularly in that regard. So any other comments or questions to Mark or Todd by the governing body? Okay, so I want to see if we've got Blake Peterson from Tucson on the phone here.
I am on mic check. Can everybody hear me okay?
We can. So please welcome. And again, it's only been a week, and just we want to hear how it's going or how it went.
Well, thank you, Chair Decker, and those committee members. It's been going well, to say the least. So we were anticipating a lot more noise and a lot more issues coming on board, but thanks to the roadmap put out by CAISO all our hard work from the workers here and CAISO members that we've had successful entry and very smooth this past week. So I can't complain at all. It's good to see it's accumulation of all our hard work over the past 2.5 years. CAISO's guidance. So I'd like to thank them immensely on that, as well as I don't know if EPA touched on this, but the fellow EIM members have been really instrumental in helping us along as well, let alone CAISO laying out the roadmap. But our fellow EIM members have really reached out and helped us, bypass the lessons learned from previous entries and whatnot. So I'd like to really thank them for giving us guidance as well. Colette did a great job of highlighting our experience and the issues that we were going to experience, and the uniqueness to our entry. So I don't want to regurgitate that as well. But for the most part, can't complain. Everything has gone smooth. We're still doing our fine tuning and learning as we go. But very happy, and we're looking forward to experiencing the benefits of the
Very good. Any questions by the governing body members to Blake? Okay, so maybe we can bring, so between Khaled and Blake and Todd and Mark, the other governing body members might want to make a comment or two, but I just think this really is, it is a watershed moment for the Western energy imbalance market. And I hope that you mark your place in history here, because there were, again, new processes and things put in place that just benefit, it won't only benefit you, but it's going to benefit the entire market. So thank you and your teams back at Bonneville and back at Tucson for all the work that they put into this, and certainly the Cal ISO staff and Colette and your team. Any other comments? Excuse me.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Decker, I just wanted to, also confirm that what you said about the APIs that we developed for BPA are actually going to be available to the rest of the, WEIM entities. So those are planned, accordingly. Again, this was like more of tested, and now it works. We're gonna allow others, of course, to use it.
Very good. Going the last time, any comments by any of the other governing body members? Okay, thank you all, and thank you for making time to just be with us today. And again, hopefully, maybe you can put a placeholder on the 29th of June, and we'll hear maybe a little bit more. With that, we will move to the next agenda item, which is...
Decker, I'm sorry to interrupt you. Did you want to check for any public comment?
Thank you, Roger. Any public comment on the Western energy imbalance market implementations?
As a reminder, you can place yourself in the comment queue by utilizing the raise hand feature located at the bottom of your screen. If you're on a mobile device, you tap your screen to display the toolbar and then press raise hand. You'll be unmuted when it's your turn. Please make sure to accept the unmute message to become unmuted. If you are on a phone, you can press #2 to enter the queue. Please state your name and affiliation once unmuted.
And while we're waiting, I just want to say I'm just blowing the agenda up today because I'm really excited about the things that we just heard. So sorry for not asking for public comment.
Okay, it looks like we have no public comments at this time.
Okay. Next item on our agenda is the Western Energy Imbalance Market Benefits Update, and that is going to be done by Mark Rothleader, the Senior Vice President and Chief Operating Officer of the Cal ISO. Mark, please join us.
Good afternoon, and I am filling in for Guillermo. Unfortunately, he had some technical difficulties that we discovered last night, and so we made a quick change, and you will have me presenting today. Before I start, I do want to also congratulate Bonneville and Tucson Electric in their joining the Western Energy Imbalance Market and their smooth transition. In terms of benefits, you'll see the first benefits report out, including Tucson and Bonneville. That should be towards the end of July for the second quarter. that's when you'll start to see those benefits coming into the discussion. So if we can, go ahead and next slide, please. So I'm here to report out on the Q1 2022 benefits. It was a robust quarter. We had $172 million of gross benefits and collectively across all the EIM entities, and that includes the new additions at the time that came on in April, Avista and Tacoma. So that includes those. We're seeing a steady increase in benefits. This quarter's benefits were largely driven by the increased amount of transfer capability, but also the additional supply and opportunities because of the additional diversity of supply. But also, we should recognize that there are generally high fuel prices, gas prices that are occurring across the West. And as a result of those high gas prices, we're seeing higher benefits accrue as a result in the Western Energy Imbalance Market as well. Next slide, please. So this slide just shows that steady increase. It took us about a little over 5 years to get to the $1 billion mark, and it took us just under 2 additional years to get to the $2 billion mark. And I think that represents the increasing amount of participation through the efficient use of the transmission and transfer capability that is made available for the energy imbalance market, but then just the larger amount of resource mix really serving all demand that's in the Western Energy Imbalance Market. Next slide, please. So this is a graph that we show every quarter, and this just illustrates the amount of avoided curtailment, mainly in California in terms of renewable resources. I guess one thing that should catch your eye over this is that while the blue bars representing the avoided curtailment have been fairly steady, we do see increases amount of renewable curtailment occurring. This is probably indicative of the fact that the curtailment that's occurring is probably largely driven more by internal constraints than the transfer opportunities with neighbors. And so that's going to be a phenomenon that will continue to a point where if we get relieve those internal constraints, we may see more system-wide oversupply, in which case the WEIM will continue to help reduce that curtailment. I think I'll take this opportunity to also note that California ISO did hit a record amount of load that was matched by Renewable Resources. Actually, this last Sunday, we had over 100% of renewable supply that was sufficient to cover all our demand during the day. So it's quite a mark, but it also was a day in which we saw the energy imbalance market work quite well when we had that large amount of renewable supply, and we were able to use some of that supply to offset other higher cost emitting resources across the West. Next slide, please. So this graph is just an illustration for the quarter, how we see the net import represented by the pink versus net exports represented by the blue, and how that line, those net import exports are really values to the balancing area itself. And we have an overlay there, the green bar representing how the volume of basically flow through or wheel through the respective balancing areas. And we track this to really just monitor to see the relative difference and see if there's times where the amount of wheel through exceeds the amount of net import export total. And in this month, this quarter, we did see, in the case of Arizona and Nevada, slightly higher amount of wheel through. This does change by season. It does change by month. And it is something, an issue that we are kind of taking up through the extended day ahead market and will probably reflect back into the Western Energy Imbalance Market is there a need to figure a compensation mechanism for those wheel-throughs, especially when they are in larger volumes of the net import-export. Next slide, please. So this is just a graphic of just seeing how in the positive, you're seeing the net imports out of each area through across all hours of the quarter. And then in the negative direction where a balancing area is exporting. And what I really like about this graph is it quickly illustrates how the Western Energy Imbalance Market is really quite effective over the day and over the hours, where in the middle of the day we have sometimes large amounts of exports coming out of California. We're displacing other resources in other areas that are importing and creating value for those other areas. And then as the sun goes down, you see things reverse, and you see imports coming back into California, and so we can see where the areas that are providing some of that energy in the opposite direction. But it just goes to show that the value is working in both directions, and we're making, again, quite efficient use of the transmission and the resources over the day as a result of the Western Energy Imbalance Market. Next slide, please. And this colorful graph is just an illustration of the kind of the average prices for each entity and how they line up relative to those dash lines in the middle that represent the Mid-C bilateral, Palo Verde bilateral, and California-Oregon border bilateral marketplace prices. And you can see here that, generally speaking, most of the areas are at or below those prices. But you see also there's some cases, largely in the California area, where it's slightly higher. And so this is a nice illustration of that comparison over the entire quarter. So with that, I think that completes my presentation, and I can take any questions.
Questions for Mark from the governing body? Val?
I actually don't have a question, but I do have a big thank you since I complained, perhaps a bit bitterly, I don't know. The last time we saw these slides, I was having trouble reading them. I think that they've been revamped to be very, very readable, and it certainly makes it easier to absorb this information. So thank you to Guillermo, and thank you, Mark.
I'll go pass that along. Thank you.
Other comments or questions from the governing body?
Yeah, Anita, this is Jennifer. I do have a quick question for Mark.
Go ahead.
Mark, if we could go back to the slide where we were looking at the curtailment, I just wanted to make sure that I understood what this is really representing, because so not this slide, it's the
one previous, yeah. So
yeah, go ahead, Mark.
Yeah. So yeah, what this represents through some counterfactual analysis, we can determine whether how much of the energy that is being produced by the renewable resources would have not been able to produce as a result of, if you basically said there were not EIM transfers. And so the blue bar really represents that volume that is able to provide value across the Western Energy Imbalance footprint and not get curtailed as a result of the Western Energy Imbalance Market. And it's a quantification of the amount of energy gigawatt hours over that month. The gray bar is the rest of the amount of energy that we still see a fair amount of curtailment, especially in the springtime months. And that is curtailment that's still occurring on some of the renewable resources in the California ISO. And that, and like I said earlier, some of that is not avoidable because it's due to localized constraints for which the Western Energy Imbalance Market will not necessarily help solve or mitigate that type of curtailment.
Okay, so
I guess lastly, that brown line is just the cumulative amount of energy that was avoided curtailment, and that energy was basically able to offset or displace other emitting resources. And there we quantify the amount of converting it to GHG emissions that were avoided by using that renewable energy to basically displace other emitting resources, and that's the 712 tons of equivalent CO2 reduction.
So, yeah, and I think what was throwing me off is you mentioned that the renewable curtailments were going up over time, yet our cumulative avoided curtailments are also going up over time. But now that you've kind of clarified that these renewable curtailments are increasing, and a lot of the times this is due to internal constraints that the EIM can't even address anyway. But I think importantly, it's worth underscoring that those cumulative avoided curtailments are continuing to go up, which is certainly benefiting the organization. So, okay, great. Thanks, Mark.
Thank you for answering that, getting me to clarify that.
Thanks.
So any other questions by the governing body? And do we have any public comment or question?
As a reminder, you can use the raise hand feature on your screen, or you can use #2 if you dialed in on the phone. And it looks like we have no public comments at this time.
Okay, we will move on to the next agenda item. So we have Anna McKenna, the Cal ISO VP of Marketing Policy and Performance, and Guillermo Bautista Alderete, Director of Market Analyst and Forecasting, to give us an update on resource efficiency, which we've been very tracking very closely, and then, of course, the wheel cruise. So, Anna?
Good afternoon, Chair Decker and governing body members, members of the public, and colleagues. I am very pleased to be here today to provide you an update on two important initiatives that are continuing. First, I'll share with you where we are at on our efforts with the Wbein resource efficiency evaluation, and then I'll also share with you on our current efforts to develop a more permanent solution that will be providing priority scheduling rights for transactions within the ISO grid. But before I do that, I also wanted to take a moment to congratulate and welcome both BPA and Tucson Electric into our WEIM. And as you, Chair Decker, I've been very excited today with all the good news, and I'm very pleased and happy to hear all of this. Thank you. So over the past several months, as you are aware, the ISO has been working with stakeholders to consider enhancements on the WEIM Resource Efficiency Evaluation, or RSC. You know, the RSC is a collection of 4 tests that determine whether a balancing authority area that participates in the WEIM has sufficient capacity and flexibility to meet their forecasted demand, and that their WEIM base schedules are feasible and balanced. We've made several improvements to the accuracy test in time for this summer and beyond, and those have been filed with FERC, and they're pending before the Commission. We hope to have an order by May 27th so that we can go live with those enhancements by June 1st. We also have conducted extensive analysis on a number of areas, in particular over how operator actions impact and affect the ability to pass the tests, the interplay between EIM transfers and ISO exports, and also how both intertie and net load uncertainty impact the RSC. This collective analysis is nearing completion, and we will be better positioned now with this effort to consider any future changes. Another effort that's been going on and has recently completed as well is that we spent some time earlier this year considering a proposal put forth by NV Energy to consider, instead of our current practice of limiting transfers when entities fail, to consider instead financial consequences. Based on stakeholder feedback, we have decided not to rush this change and instead accelerate our efforts for a more holistic review of such changes so that we can implement those as soon as possible. So what do we expect to tackle next and when? Well, based on all the feedback we've received over the past several months and through the various efforts, we've already started working on the next possible set of changes that we can make to the RSC. First, with the analysis now behind us, we will be able to start looking at any changes that we can make to the accuracy of the tests, to address the uncertainty concerns, to address the operator action concerns, and also the interplay with exports. Second, we will also be engaged in a more holistic review of the possible consequences to failures of the RSC. And we hope to be able to find a solution that instead of limiting transfers during those, and especially during emergency situations, we instead would have financial consequences at play. Our goal is to complete our stakeholder process by the end of this year and be ready to file early next year with any changes so that we can implement them for next summer. We don't normally like to implement changes right before summer. However, based on feedback we've received that the stakeholder community would like to have possible solutions by next summer, we're accelerating our efforts to try to achieve that. We're fairly confident that if we can achieve by this August a fleshed out framework for the consequences of alternatives to the consequences of failures, by this August, we're fairly confident that we can implement those by next June. And that would not derail our efforts on other initiatives. This is a tight time frame for those changes, so we ask that stakeholders participate with us. We'll soon be posting some more information on those efforts and how that stakeholder process will unfold. And with that, before I move on to the next topic, I'll pause and see if there are any questions.
Questions by the governing body members? Okay, I have a couple questions now. So you said the analysis was near completion, like near is like in the next 30 days or near is like in the next 60 days?
I believe we've pretty much completed two of the efforts in the analysis. We have some additional work to do on the uncertainty, and so we should be able to wrap that up fairly soon. I wouldn't say 60 days. I don't have the exact number, but more like the end of this month of May.
Okay, great. When you I'm making a note. When you mentioned looking at things more holistically, and you talked about the NV's proposal, when you talk about looking at things more holistically and then kind of this next element, is that when NV's proposal will be more holistically looked at, or is that some other time in the future?
Yeah, no, that's pretty much what we're doing, is to look at the NV proposal and, the financial consequences a little bit more holistically, because some of the concerns that were raised by stakeholders were that this is a good idea. It was supported as a proposal in general, but we haven't had the time to really look at all the implications and, address those consequences if there's any adverse consequences of the proposal. Now, it may morph through the stakeholder process. It may evolve, but the whole point of it is to really look at financial consequences a little bit more holistically as to how it impacts the overall market.
Okay. So, and you made comment that you hope to have something that looks like a pretty good straw proposal by Q3. Did I get that right? Q3?
By August. So the idea is if we can flesh out something by August, it doesn't have to be final. We'll still have to work our way through completing the stakeholder process and coming to obtain approval for that by the end of this year. But if we can flesh out the design to a sufficiently, to some certainty, technology will be able to start working on that or start making changes and considering changes to accommodate that by next year.
Okay. All right. No, that helps just kind of getting in my head, like where this is, because I know how important it is. It's definitely on the top 1, 2, 3 of stakeholder comments. And so just having a good understanding for me on kind of what the timeline is and how this is breaking down and where things are being incorporated is just really helpful. And I'm guessing in our meeting in June, you'll have a little more update on how this is going as you start looking towards the end of August.
That's right. I hope to be providing you a little bit more meat behind that when we talk again in June.
Okay. And so last chance, anybody on the governing body, any questions? And I'm going to ask, because you've got two pieces here, if there's public comment about this particular, the RSE and the process, can we just pause a moment and see if there's any public comment?
Once again, if you do have a comment, you can go ahead and use the raise hand function located on the bottom toolbar, or press #2 if you dialed in via phone. It looks like we have no comments at this time.
Okay, great. And so now our second favorite topic, the wheel through. Anna, go ahead.
Thank you. So yes, that is our second favorite topic. The wheel through effort, as you know, earlier this year, we did ask FERC's approval, and FERC has since approved for us to extend the interim measure that we put in place last year, so that our stakeholders and market participants have certainty as to what's happening this year. But we have also begun working very actively on a more permanent proposal for 2024, and I'll be sharing a little bit more with you on that. One thing to note, and I wanted to share with you as well, as we're approaching the summer months, we do see, based on the requests that people made last year for this interim service, and as well as what we're seeing coming in already this year, the focus for this type of service and concern is really targeted towards the summer months, of course, when the system is most constrained. So particularly for the months of June through September, that seems to be the focus for this type of service. So, earlier this year, and I believe I shared this with you all previously, but we did engage the services of OATI to help us to develop a straw proposal for the procedure that would allow external parties to actually request for higher scheduling priorities for wheel-through transactions under certain prescribed conditions. We're working towards publishing a straw proposal the week of May 30th, and we're on track for that posting. Prior to starting to draft the straw proposal, we actually held several stakeholder working group meetings through which we were able to obtain a lot of input on how others manage these issues on their system, as well as what stakeholders were looking for in terms of the features of this new service. So with all of that information and the help of OATI, we are looking to have a straw proposal that will focus on putting forward a durable framework for subscribing to scheduling priority for wheel-throughs on a forward-looking basis across the CAISO system, while balancing the need to protect native load, as well as looking at methods that are consistent with other ISO and RTO practices and other utility practices for similar issues. At this point, and I don't want to be held exactly to this, I'll share with you a little bit as to what we're looking and what's coming in the future, but it's still in process. But I thought I'd share with you a little bit as to what we're looking at. We're looking at a framework where the ISO would be able to calculate what capacity is available across the system at interties, which we can assess based on requests or subscriptions made by entities for wheel-through service on the ISO system. When we're calculating that ATC, we would be having to identify what transmission capacity is actually needed to serve native load across different time horizons that we're considering right now. And this would be, the ATC calculation of this would be consistent with how others do that type of calculation across the West. And what we anticipate is that we would, and this is not yet final, but we're from a straw proposal development process, we're still thinking about some of this stuff. But based on what we've heard so far, we're looking at possibly requests over 12 months, monthly, and based on some feedback we've received, maybe even on a day-ahead process. So in other words, even from a more shorter-term requests for certainty on the delivery of the wheel-throughs to our system. So that's kind of the frameworks we're looking at right now. We also hope that if we're able to calculate that ATC in advance, it will allow us to move away from the current requirements that we have in the interim process, where we're looking at folks having external transmission designated from the system in order to qualify for the higher priority of wheel-throughs. So we would move away from that framework. And, that sort of gives you a flavor of kind of what we're looking at. A couple of areas of interest, of course, within this framework, and we'll be having to work on, and questions that have been forth, of course, obviously, is how are you going to develop that ATC designation, or how are you going to determine what capacity is available? We're not fully done with thinking about that. We hope to have something that stakeholders can look at and evaluate quite carefully in a straw proposal that we hope to post soon. The second question to consider, and we hope to get a lot of feedback on, is the compensation mechanism for establishing that priority. Of course, in anticipation of a subscription for such service, you would expect that there would be some form of compensation that needs to be considered. So those are the two sort of pivotal questions we'll be asking and working with stakeholders on. We hope to be able to put in the straw proposal some initial scenarios on how these things will work out, and have at least the key elements worked out. So that pretty much gives you perhaps a little bit of visibility as to what's formulating in the background right now. I didn't want to spoil the news at the end of May, but thought it might be helpful to give you some insights on that. We do recognize this is an extremely important issue for load-serving entities outside of the ISO system, and we are pretty much dedicating a good amount of resources to get this done by 2024 so that we'll have that at play. And we hope that stakeholders will also engage actively to help us finalize that after we get that straw proposal out, at the end of May. What our next steps are in terms of process after we get the straw proposal out. And as I noted, we already had a lot of working groups, and so we're at a good space right now where we can actually put a straw proposal out and start our iteration with stakeholders. Once we get that straw proposal out at the end of May, we hope to have stakeholder meetings in June, as well as comments submitted in writing to us by the end of June, which will kick off that dialogue again with stakeholders on the design. And we hope to have several iterations with stakeholders as we work through the final and finalize this proposal by later this year, so that we can file this with FERC early in 2023, so we could have it in place so that in 2024 it could launch. One of the things that's going to be important with this, of course, since it's a forward process, we want to make sure we have it ahead of 2024, so that if there's a lead time that has to happen, we can be prepared for that. And I see there's actually several hands up, so perhaps I should stop. Sorry, I missed your hands earlier, but I'll pause.
So, John, you want to go ahead?
Okay, thanks. Bob's got his hands up too. So thanks, Anna. This is a good report, and I know it isn't final in the straw proposal, but when you were talking about the calculation of ATC, kind of forward-looking, you may have said it. I was busy writing things down. How far forward are you going to be able to do that? In other words, is an entity going to be able to secure resource and firm transmission to the border 18 months in advance, and then have the ATC calculated during that period, or is it more near term?
Well, these are the questions we're looking at right now. So you can imagine that the more forward you go in that calculation, the more uncertain that is. And so it depends on, what the assumptions are and how you look to carve out that capacity that's needed to serve native load. What I believe is going to have to happen is sort of, the methodology might be consistent throughout. However, there may be different assumptions you use between a 12-month subscription period or a monthly period, or even the day ahead process. The more out you go, the more uncertain that will be. And so we're looking to address those questions a little bit more closely. The methodology itself perhaps might be the same, but it's a question as to what goes into the assumptions that go into it.
Okay, so it's to be determined.
Yes, that's right. And I right now don't have a complete answer as to, what's the golden timeline for which that works best. But that's part of the questions we need stakeholders to help us answer on that one, is what are the requirements and what they're looking for.
Okay, thank you.
Rob?
Anna, thank you for the update on both of these items. As Elliot had mentioned earlier, these are really two very important items for those in the West and being followed pretty closely and, quite important in looking at how everything works. And I think you addressed a lot of the issues that are out there. And so I appreciate that. And let me add that I think it's great to hear that these are moving along and the timing is good such that, they're still meeting, what the projections were and still in play, like on the wheel-throughs for summer 2024. I had a similar question to John, so I don't need to ask that. But one thing I was going to ask you, if it's been brought up to date, is once you and your staff have been going through and you get something in place, I can almost see somewhat of a queue building, kind of like an interconnection request, to everyone's going to possibly be trying to get a lot of requests through at the same time. Normally when when new transmission becomes available, it's posted that it'll become available at midnight at such and such a date, and then everybody has notice of it. And usually, right, there's maybe one entity that responds. In this case here, there's a lot of interest in whatever is the outcome of the process. And have you considered, or has it been discussed to date as to, once you have this done, how the transmission request for whatever is available is processed? Because I can see this being very difficult.
It is always a difficult process, and I think you're right that once we're going to have to figure out, and this is part of the proposal, will be how do you walk through that subscription process? There'll be first, is it a first come, first serve basis? Do you have to provide some kind of commitment? Is there an evaluation process? These are the questions we need to answer through this proposal. That to me is part of the service, or the how you obtain that additional priority. And there may be competing interests at same locations we have to consider. You may have more than one person, one entity requesting for the same wheel through all those locations. We're trying to leverage both our own practices, but also practices from other, ISOs and RTOs in terms of how those things are done. I don't think we will have, it won't be as robust, if you wish. It's not a generator interconnection process as you wish, from that perspective, but you need to consider those fairness rules through it. And so, yes, we will have to have that be part of our package.
Yeah, I think you're going to be in a very unique position that the other ISOs and RTOs have not been in, where, it built up over a very long period of time to get to a point where you have one new addition and then, there's a look at it. Whereas here, there will be a call it a go live date, and then there's that mad scramble, and then, or maybe there's a better process, which is what you just said, look at. But I can see this being a very big challenge, and hopefully that portion of it is given some consideration on how that can be managed well.
Right, and that's why I was suggesting that, we need to complete this in time to then implement that process, right? You can't just say on January 1st, here you go, let's start that process and have it done. So that's the lead time we need to implement that process and go through the, iterations. I think I see a hand up by Elliot, but I'm not sure if others have hands up as well. There may be Roger and Elliot whose hands are up, and I don't know who went first. I see David has a.
Yeah, I was just going to supplement that. I totally agree with your responses. I was just going to augment, Rob. We certainly, getting this new system into production as expeditiously as possible is obviously a critical priority, because we do really understand how important an issue this is for so many, of our partners, particularly folks down the desert Southwest and other areas. The second thing is that, we really want to emphasize, we really are trying to kind of go back to the standard, open access blueprint, and just make sure that we're working with a set of rules that are consistent with the way that other vertically integrated and ISOs and RCOs deal with this. And also, we recognizing the point that you made, you have to look at this as sort of short, medium, and longer term. We're also now really beginning to try to pair this with transmission planning processes as possible, so that over time we can also make sure that we can really open up additional inventory for point-to-point type users, right? Because now that I think we're in the West, we're all recognizing, when you're buying from the market, you've got power capacity and transmission capacity sufficiency issues that need to be dealt with, and we need to be thinking about, adding additional lanes to the highway over time. So all of these things have to come together so that we have a really, truly durable, long-term solution. Just wanted to add that.
Okay. So I didn't see other hands from the governing body. I do want to see if there's any public comment.
Once again, if you do have a public comment, you can go ahead and use the raise hand function on the bottom toolbar or dial #2 on your telephone keypad. And I'm currently seeing no public comments.
So one of the things that occurs to me, because this has not only been an issue with some of our participants, but it certainly has gotten the attention of some of the commissions. So as the straw proposal is ready, or when it's released, I'm hoping that you guys are looking at some of the commission's staff members that work with their commissioners to purposely do a briefing or two with a couple of the commissions that this has been on their radar screen as well.
Yeah, well.
Chair Decker, I was just going to mention I'll be traveling down to Arizona here later this month and meeting with a number of parties in the Desert Southwest, including folks from the Arizona Corporations Commission, just to continue the communication. So yeah, we want to really make sure we're getting their input and that there's a strong sense of what the longer term solutions look like. So I really agree with that recommendation.
Okay, and I thank you for this. As you know, this is like, we have been asking for your updates every single meeting, and you always do a great job, and things are progressing. We're just, as you can imagine, we're anxious to get to the straw proposal. So good work on your team. I see you working away on it, even in Crepsey last week. I know you were on it. So thank you for the work that you're doing and your team. And with that, I think, why don't you move us into what's coming up in the next month or two or three?
I'd be happy to. Yes, let's get to the next slide. So what's going to walk you all through what's coming up in the next few months. If we can move to the next slide, please. Thank you. So they're not too busy of June, as you can see with the current schedule. We don't have any big decisions. However, there will be the Weim governing body slate coming to you, as well the election of the chair and vice chair, which of course is big business in and of itself, so don't want to undermine that in any way, but there won't be any policy decisions, if you wish, coming to you in June. There will be the regular briefings, and we'll continue on with those, of course, as usual. In July, however, we do hope to take to both the governing body and the Board of Governors excuse me our RDRR phase 2 efforts. As you might recall, we came and asked for some permission on changes to change the rules on reliability demand response bidding for this summer. We have some additional changes we'll be asking to make, and those will come to you in July. And that's pending currently the decisional classification as indicated on this chart. We also are going to be making a market parameter change that affects the way we calculate the congestion parts of the, for CRR purposes, congestion revenue rights purposes. And that's a item that will be coming to the Board of Governors next in July. I don't think actually we have a decisional classification on that yet, so therefore it's also under pending as well. In the month of August, we have energy storage enhancements, and that is a effort to enhance the way we model the storage resources in the market, as well as the day-ahead market enhancements. Again, both those items are not yet final on a decisional classification. as you can see from this posting. The energy storage enhancements will be available to all resources if you wish to participate in the market. And the day-ahead market enhancements are elements you've heard a lot about already, including the inclusion of an imbalanced reserve product into the day-ahead market, which is something that you've heard about also as an essential component for the EDAM. So those are the items coming to you in August and through August. Sorry, coming for decisional consideration still, but coming as policy changes through August. Excuse me.
I think the thing that you guys would be great to be on here, because I see some of these are joint authorities, some of these are, and some of the briefings are just particular to the Western Energy Imbalance Market. I think where we're going to have where we're having GRC updates or GRC briefings, I would ask that the GRC briefings be included in this, so we know kind of what the stage gate is on some of those. And John, I saw your hand up.
Well, that was the same thing, just need to get with maybe Stacy Crowley and see if we can fold in the GRC updates into this calendar.
Okay.
Thank you. We'll take that back and make sure we capture that for the next upcoming briefing.
And one last thing. So you can't print anything out of our board books. Can we get this particular page? That would be helpful for me. I want to print it. It's just a place for me to make notes.
I'll ask Stacy to help us with that. Stacy Bernard. I probably am not the right person to help you, but I'll make sure we get that to you.
Oh yeah,
it'll happen. We'll get it.
Do it. Okay. Okay. Any further questions or comments from the governing body? Anna, keep going.
There is another slide to this that takes us through the rest of the year and covers some of this material. So we can just go to the next slide. In the third quarter, as I noted, actually in the month of August, we have, and July, we have those items I just went through: energy storage, day-ahead market, RDRR, as well as parameter change. And then, of course, through the fourth quarter, still pending decisional classification will be the extended day-ahead market design that we hope to be able to complete by the end of this year and seek approval of to proceed with a filing in early of 2023. So that pretty much takes us through the year for these efforts.
So again, any comments or questions by the governing body? Anna, thank you. I think the planning calendar has gotten more crisp and better to kind of see what's going on. So thank you for you guys' work on that and putting that together for us. I don't think I have to do public comment on this, but I'm going to, Roger. Any public comment about the planning calendar? And not hearing our operator say that there is anything. The last thing on our agenda are the administrative reports, our budget, kind of how things are going. Is there anything in the informational reports that any of the governing body want to bring forward into the meeting? Okay, I would only remind folks that, if you're attending this meeting virtually or you're on the phone, that we do have a joint board of governors session tomorrow, and that's at 3 o'clock. And hearing no further questions or comments, the governing body meeting is adjourned.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Take care, everybody.
Thank you for using Event Services. Now,
Bye.